the author of 6 story collections, Harmony of the World, which I remember the initial release being at Marwell's, I believe.
That's right.
And which won the Associated Writing Program. Through the Safety Net, which is a classic story collection, Relative Stranger, Believers, and then Griffin and New and Selected Stories. If you don't know Griffin, you got to look that one up. It's a classic. I remember it was made into a after-school special, which Charlie is extremely proud of. Now, I don't know if that's true. But they got the right character to play the main character. That Maggie Gyllenhaal, was it? I think it was. And she fit the part. Numerous awards. Baxter received the award in literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, Guggenheim National Endowment, the Lawrence Foundation, Michigan Author of the Year, many Michigan Council of the Arts Awards. And he, The Feast of Love was a finalist for the 2000 National Book Award. He has a new book that is coming out in the near future. He currently teaches at the University of Minnesota and at the Warren Wilson MFA program. Please welcome back to Detroit, Charles Baxter.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all for coming. I thought that what I would do for you today is to read the opening chapter of my new novel, which is called The Sun Collective. And the title refers to a little neighborhood progressive anarchist group here in Minneapolis. And I think that some of the events in the novel have become more relevant since I wrote the book, more relevant than ever. So what I'll do is read most of the opening chapter. And one of the things I should say about it maybe is that there's a strange guy who gets on the light rail commuter train halfway into this chapter. And what he offers is a cure. And the cure he offers is one that I discovered was a folklore cure that was being spread around country people in the 1910 flu epidemic. So here we go. This is the opening chapter of The Sun Collective. Soon after he boarded the Blue Line light rail at the downtown Minneapolis station, keeping an eye out for his son, who had deliberately gone missing and was living somewhere on the streets, Bredigan checked the available space, saw 2 empty seats next to each other at the far end of the car, and aimed himself in their direction as the doors chimed shut. Having taken the one on the aisle, he removed his Minnesota Twins baseball cap and placed it beside him so that no one would drop down there. The translucent advertising sheath attached to the outside of the train car was filtering the sun and gave his hands a bruised discoloration, as if he had been in a fistfight. A young couple shadowed him onto the train and sat down in the seats opposite his own. A man of retirement age, Bredigan wore an expression of studied neutrality whenever he found himself in public. He had the look of someone who possessed important secret information and who needed to fade into the background to avoid exposure. On his ring finger, he wore a loose-fitting gold wedding band, thickened with adhesive tape to secure it. Despite his age, he still had a full head of graying hair rather bushy eyebrows, and penetrating blue eyes. Deep lines crossed his face. With his khakis and cotton sports shirt, he gave an appearance of informality, but he sat straight as a child who had been told not to slouch, and he gazed out the grimy window with the uneasy intelligence of someone who has few illusions to comfort him. This morning, the train had apparently been steam cleaned, and the usual professional managerial types, suited, accessorized, and iPhoned, were seated nearby, tapping out messages, talking into their Bluetooths, or reading the Wall Street Journal. Very few victims of capitalism were on the train today. Most people thought of them as the homeless, or vagrants, or the deinstitutionalized mad. But for Bredigan, they were victims of capitalism, that generally proportioned sector of the economy that had never had a single foothold on the ladder of success, and who were lying on the ground anywhere they could fall unmolested. In summer, you'd find them on the train, rumbling out to the Utopia Mall, a terminal point where they would not disembark, but stay right where they were, collapsed in heaps, half asleep, and therefore semi-alert, until the train started up again and returned to downtown Minneapolis. They had no purchases. They consumed nothing but air and food scraps. Even the tattered clothes they wore seemed borrowed from somewhere. Back and forth the trains would go, carrying their human freight. Something about public transportation, you could see it also in coaches on Amtrak cars, had a narcotic effect and seemed to render their passengers half alive, their heads flung back in comatose slumber. At 38th Street, a well-tailored gentleman boarded. He wore a three-piece suit, a trench coat, and a soft black trilby hat. The hat made him appear as if he were in costume. He trailed a small suitcase on wheels. His glasses consisted of small tinted circles on thin gold frames, and some property in the lenses reflected light in such a way as to make his eyes nearly invisible. Standing in the aisle next to Bredigan, bathed in soapy blue sunshine, he looked down, smiled, and asked if the seat next to Bredigan's, the one on which Bredigan's baseball cap lay, was taken. No, not at all, Bredigan said, picking up his cap and putting it on. Please, sit down. The man dropped down in slow motion next to Bredigan, lifting the crease in his trousers in an old-fashioned gesture. Thank you kindly, the man said. He had a trace of a Southern accent. A few moments passed. The man cleared his throat. Thank you, he repeated, looking straight ahead before checking his pocket watch, like the White Rabbit in Wonderland. You have a plane to catch? Bredigan asked, making a social effort. Yes, you could say that, the man said. Where to? Bredigan asked him, trying to keep his questions on this side of politeness, the starchy affability one attempts with strangers. Paris, the man said. I'm going to a conference. Ah, Bredigan said. And you, the man asked, where might you be going? He turned to glance at Bredigan, but behind his lenses, the man's eyes remained invisible. Maybe he didn't have eyes. Maybe he had something else. Oh, me? Bredigan shook his head. I'm headed out to the mall to get some exercise. I'll meet with some friends out there and then we'll walk around until we tire. It's air conditioned. And although I don't particularly care for, yes, the man said, agreeably interrupting him. I've seen them. I should say, I've seen walking around people like you. But tell me, why don't you stroll around the lakes in the city or the parks, outdoors? I myself enjoy the city's recreational locales this time of the year. Birds and, the man thought for a moment, trees. The stranger wore cologne, Britigan noticed. The scent was like autumn, aromatic burnt leaves, and the man's accent faded in and out as if he were imitating a Southerner without actually being one himself. Well, I have a medical condition, Bretigan informed him, so I need to stay out of high temperatures, and therefore I go to the mall, the man said, interrupting again. Yes, who was this person prying into his early morning life and finishing his sentences for him? So, Bretigan said, doing his best to take control of the situation, if you don't mind my asking, what conference are you going to? Rather quickly, and as if by magic, the man reached into his pocket and drew out a business card before handing it to Bretigan. Dr. Arver L. Jefferson, MD, Psychoanalytic and Associated Therapies, member, Midwest Institute of Proton Analytics. The doctor's email address and phone numbers had been printed at the bottom of the card, but the ink was smudged and illegible.